Yeah.
Welcome to everybody to Canterbury. Welcome everybody to Canterbury Putty. We always have to start you with a quick safety announcement. So if we can ask please that everybody stays seated throughout the journey, especially when we go under some of our low bridges, and they get a great deal lower than this one. This is quite a high bridge. Keep your hands inside the boat, which means they can't get caught between boat and bank. And if we're near to the edge, please don't try to help by pushing our boat away. It might send in the direction the boatman doesn't want to. Likewise, if we're passing another boat, please, under no circumstances, try to push it away. When you get back, just stay seated. We'll get the boat secure and tell you when it's safe to get off. If you were to put your hands in the water, it is fairly clean, but would recommend you should then wash your hands before you repeatedly, and don't drink water. Okay? Right, this is Mitch, he's in charge of you.
Hello. Actually, I might take the camera.
Okay, go and do that quickly. Or I should say it's a river stour, because in fact there's at least 5 different stowers in England. This one gets known as the Great or the Kentish Stour, and that will distinguish it from other river stowers you'll find about the place. The river was of great use to the people of Canterbury, and they used it as a sort of transport and moved goods along here. They used it for water mills. There used to be 8 water mills along this river, and they used it for industry. We had fairly important weaving and tanning industries. But I'm afraid they used it for other things as well. Take a look ahead of it, and you'll notice there's a hole in the wall coming up and a slide coming out of it. What do you think would have come sliding out of there to go plop into the river? Yep. Exactly. That was the outlet to an old-fashioned toilet or privy, so you'd get nice fat fish, but nobody ever wanted to drink the water. In fact, we know that in medieval times, because the water wasn't safe, people preferred to drink beer or wine or cider instead. I can understand that. A monk in medieval Canterbury would be allowed to drink up to 1 gallon of beer a day. 4 litres of beer every day. However, it's not quite as good as it sounds, because at least half of that was what they termed small beer. And small beer is very weak, it was only about 1% alcohol. So they weren't drunk all of the time. Fat wood pigeon. If anybody's got any questions about the history of Canterbury, or the river, or my boat, do please ask. I'll do my best to explain. You've got just over 2,000 years of history, and not a great deal of time to talk about it.
2000, yeah. Good question. No, not a couple. No, not a plastic one.
The river, as I say, is clean, and it means there's a lot of fish in here. So do take a look at this. Take a look as we go and spot that you can see.
Hello. Where's some money?
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello. Goodbye. Now the next bridge coming up is known as the Greyfriars Bridge, and it is quite a low one. So do mind your heads as you go under here, and that does also go for me as well. I usually fit under here, but if for any reason I don't make it, work out amongst yourselves who wants to take over as the new captain. Always remembering, ahoy, that if there is an emergency, for example if we hit an iceberg, the captain has to stay with. So if you mind your head at the front there since we're coming down past this wall. Thank you.
Ja bym sēdēju vēl, bet ar rankom būtu darba. O 4 no to je priekšā. O 4 stumtas.
Don't worry about that pipe, it's only bringing rainwater here. So, if you look ahead of us, you'll see there's a building actually going over the river. And that building is known as the East Bridge Hospital. But it was not a hospital in the modern sense of the word. It wasn't a place anybody came to because they were ill. It's a place you'd come to as a pilgrim seeking hospitality. And the pilgrims would come here knowing they would be given somewhere to sleep and a meal absolutely free of charge. But only the poor pilgrims would come here, because they'd only be given a place on the floor to sleep and a really simple meal. So most pilgrims preferred, if they could, to pay and then go to one of the various pilgrim hotels in the city instead. There were lots of these because in the Middle Ages, Canterbury had become the third most popular pilgrimage site in all of Europe, and only the cities of Rome and of Santiago de Compostela in Spain attracted more pilgrims than Canterbury was. Watch out for the pigeons as we come under here. There's usually a few. Have fun, Andrew. Thank you. So we're going under the hospital, parts of which date back to the 1180s. And then we're going to go under the High Street, and this stone bridge takes the main road for the middle of Canterbury. And today it's pedestrianised, but until 1965 this used to be the A2, the main road between London and Dover. All the heavy traffic from Dover came over this bridge. Can you make sure you're all well inside the boat? Bring your hands in, so if you could lean into the boat please. Because we're now entering this tunnel, and that's going to take us underneath an old watermill. And the watermill was known as the King's Mill, and we know it was standing here in the year 1144. That's the year that King Stephen gave the lease on it to the abbots of St Augustine's Abbey. It's not a watermill anymore, and it hasn't been one now for getting on for 200 years. You've now in fact got an Italian restaurant above us, the ASK, but most people in Canterbury don't even know that there is a tunnel here, because you just don't notice it from the high street. By the way, if anybody is at all worried about spiders, don't look up. There's a few here. Don't worry, the spiders are very happy where they are. They don't want to come down because they know if they did, they'd have to go swimming and would then become fish food. No pigeons. See the pigeons like to nest. They're not normally bothered by us. They're so used to us by now. Some of you may be glad to hear we will not be coming back through the tunnel. We only come downstream this way. Okay, so we're out into the middle of the city of Canterbury, and you'll notice a number of gates and doors that open onto the water, and this would allow people to have their own boats here. So there's a gate here with a ring bolt beneath it to tie boats to, and they've got a large black doorway coming up. Hello, and a small blue as well.
The most
Sorry, you're looking at the butterfly.
famous use for these
Notice they've still got a door handle on the outside there, so they can still get visitors by boat when they need. Ahoy! If anybody's hungry, by the way, you've got the Pizza Express there. You can knock on the door, ask them for a float by menu, and we'll collect your pizza on the way back.
Wow.
No, actually, we won't. It would have been nice, and we did suggest they should do that, or Baby Moorhen down. But they said they're too worried about the health and safety problems of having to pass a pizza out of the window. Now this next bridge is called the Friars Bridge, and it's one that had to be repaired after the Second World War, and they put a concrete arch in underneath, and that has now given it a really good echo. So as we come under here, feel free to shout or sing or yodel and listen to the sound of the echo.
Yeah.
And then we're about to go past the Marlowe Theatre, named for the playwright Christopher Marlowe, who had been born in Canterbury back in 1564. same year that one William Shakespeare had been born in Stratford. But we know that Marlowe didn't just work as a playwright, that he worked at times as a spy when he was spying for Queen Elizabeth I against her enemies in Belgium and Holland and France. And it's thought to be linked to his spying that led to Marlowe being murdered in the town of Deptford near London in 1593. He was stabbed through his right eye by a man called Ingram Fraser. And Marlowe had only been 29 when he died, and this meant that most of his talent went to waste. William Shakespeare, who greatly admired him, is recorded as saying that if he could, he'd have exchanged all the plays he'd ever written for the ones that Marlowe had never got the chance to write. The face up there is called Bulkhead, and it's a modern sculpture by a chap called Rick Kirby. Lots of people like to stand behind it and get their photos taken looking out through the eye holes. Small children usually prefer to stand in front of it. You can guess where they poke their fingers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now these buildings are what's left of an old monastery, and the monastery is known as the Blackfriars. The Blackfriars were Dominicans, and these were the people who often ran the Inquisition, so you really did not want to upset them. There were about 11 buildings within their monastery, but only 2 of them have remained standing. The one to my left was their guest house, and that's where they would put up their important visitors, and by placing the guest house on the far side of the road to the main monastery, it would allow the guests to come and go, but not disturb the friars at their prayers. The main monastery was to the right, in the shape of a square, and that building was their dining hall or refectory. One moment. Ahoy!
Ahoy there, Andrew.
The refectory was used by the monks for eating it. It's now used by the King's School as their art department. And these objects you see here on the bank are works of art, or at least that's what they try to tell us. The King's School had been founded by King Henry VIII back in 1542, and it was to begin with for some 50 poor boys of Canterbury, and the King helped pay for their education. Today's school takes over 800 children. Since 1990 they have even allowed girls to go there, and it's now the parents that pay the fees, and they come to around £32,000 a year. But it is a boarding school, and that means that once they've paid that money, the parents know they're not going to have to see their children for 9 months of the year if they don't want to. They do scholarships, sir. They do scholarships.
Sorry? If there's got to be...
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't like that.
I usually recommend people think of the King's School as being rather like Harry Potter's Hogwarts, but without the magic.
How often does the river flow?
Quite often, I'm afraid. 2 years ago, we had most of the outlying villages of Canterbury were flooded. Canterbury itself wasn't too bad, but places like Bridge and Barham and Littlebourne and the town of Maidstone were very badly. 12 years ago, there were some 80 homes in the city flooded, and back in 1909 and again in 1928, most of the centre of the city was under water. But we usually get some fairly mild flooding virtually every winter. And that's one of the things that these gates are less very useful. These are sluice gates that now control the water level. Maybe more hens? Now I did warn you about the low bridge just in time. Ahead of us used to stand Canterbury's largest water mill, known as the Abbots Mill, and it was there until 1933. And on October the 17th of that year, a young boy working here at the water mill had gone up to the hayloft at the top. and he found it was full of smoke. And he came running down to raise the alarm, but it was too late. The fire had taken too great a hold. When the fire brigade got here, they quickly realised they couldn't save the watermill, and they instead put all of their effort into saving the pub over the road. I'm glad they did that because it's a really nice pub and it's very good beer, so I'm glad they did that. Now there is a slight problem with trying to go through these arches, and that's the fact there's a drop of about 2 metres on the other side.
Yeah.
So we won't indulge in any white water punting on this trip. Fortunately, when the mill burned down, no lives were lost, and they even managed to rescue all of the cats and the dogs from the water mill. They kept cats and dogs there to control the numbers of mice and rats.
Moja, say cheese.
So again, the baby moor hens to the left.
Questa? Questa è Gabriele.
These gates have been built back in 1829 for the water mill. And although they're now getting on for 200 years old, they're still in perfect working order. They're now used as a flood control. So when it rains hard, they'll open one or more gates that will let the rain down and they'll let the excess water out. If you'd like to look back to my pole, where my hand is here on the pole, from there down to the deck, that's how deep the water is just there.
Wow.
So it's deep enough to swim if you'd like to.
Yeah, but if you're not swimming...
Not today?
No, I'm telling you, if you're not swimming, it's not very pleasant to go down.
Very slimy.
Yeah.
So, were there any particular subjects to do with the history of Canterbury that people would like you to talk about? Yeah? About? Oh, the ducking pool? Yeah, okay, I'll talk about that on the way back up if you like when we're close to it. You do know it's a fake? Yep. So I'll talk about it then. Canterbury is quite an ancient city. We were founded by the Romans approximately 2,000 years ago. The Roman Emperor, Claudius, had landed at the port of Richborough near to Sandwich in the year 43 AD. And Canterbury is basically 1 day's march from Richborough in the direction of London. So it's a very suitable place for an overnight stop. And the city flourished and reached a population of approximately 20,000 people. They called it Doavernum Pantiacor, meaning a strong fortress of the Kentish people. And the word Canterbury is the same basic meaning. The canter refers to the Cantii or Cantiarchi, the local tribe, and the bur or berry means a strong fortress. The Romans were here for about 400 years. And after they left, we then became part of the Kingdom of Kent. There was no Kingdom of England in those days. And what happened here was that after the Romans left, the locals had invited a group of barbarians across the North Sea to defend them against other barbarians. They hired a group called the Jutes. And their leader, Hengist, was smart enough to realise that since he was the only person in Kent who actually had an army, then he was going to be in charge. And Hengist declared himself to be the first king of Kent. Canterbury was one of the royal centres. We didn't really have a capital as you'd imagine it today. Instead, the king would have a number of royal palaces around his kingdom and would travel from place to place. And the taxes in those days were often in the form of food. And so the king would go to places and here his court would eat the taxes and then move on. And one of the royal palaces in Kent was at Eastry. And Eastry was a royal centre. Did you know that? No? Take a look in the local library, they can probably tell you all about it. Glance up to the left and you'll see the cathedral. That was started by our first archbishop, a man called Augustine, and he came here in the year 597 on a mission to convert the locals to Christianity. And he'd been sent here by the Pope, Pope Gregory the Great. And the Pope had become interested in the English after one day going to the slave market in Rome. And in the slave market, he had found a group of very beautiful, blonde-haired and blue-eyed slave children. And he asked who these were, and he was told that these were Angles, meaning English. And the Pope then made an extremely bad joke in Latin, saying, no, surely these are not Angles, they are angels. Or in Latin, non Anglii sed Angeli, which really is not a very good joke in anybody's language. But I've no doubt they all laughed. And the Pope ordered Augustine, who was a monk living in St Andrew's Monastery in Rome, to come here and convert them to Christianity. And we know that Augustine himself didn't really want to come. That he didn't see why he was being expected to leave his home in warm, sunny Italy just to come to a cold, damp little island on the edge of nowhere. And Augustine actually turned back, and he went back to Rome, and he said to the Pope, well, I did get as far as the Alps, but it's cold in the mountains, it was snowing, and I don't want to go. And the Pope told him, well, basically, it doesn't really matter what you want to do. What does matter is that I want you to go to England, so go. So he came back here, and the reason he'd come to Canterbury is because the King of Kent at the time, King Ethelbert, although a pagan and worshipping Germanic gods, so Odin, Thor, etc., was married to a Christian wife. She was a lady called Bertha. She was the daughter of the King of France, and with her help, it didn't take too long to persuade Ethelbert that he should also convert to Christianity. And when Ethelbert became a Christian, so did 10,000 of his people. Okay, so convert one and you can have 10,000 free of charge. Augustine then built the very first cathedral here in Canterbury, and that's why it's the Archbishop of Canterbury who's reckoned to be the leading churchman in England, because his cathedral was here first. Okay, back under the echoing bridge, work out what you're going to sing.
Was he known as the Unready?
No, that was Ethelred. Ethelbert was different.
Why was the other fella known as the Unready? What was
Okay.
He was lacking.
He wasn't unready because he wasn't prepared. It meant the unready or the uncounselled, because in Old English the word reed means wise counsel, and so basically you could call him Ethelred the ill-advised.
Yeah, or a bit of a dunce.
He was, I'm afraid, yes. If you look in this hole, can you see the white pigeon in there? He's got a really nice home.
Sure, sorry, I don't flush the toilet.
Well, exactly. That's what it used to be.
Yeah.
So, do you need me to go back? Do you want me to go back for a photograph?
No, it's fine.
Sure?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's fine. Кажи. Как?
Complain much.
Kas yra to?
And again, we've got this baby moorhen to the left. So, if you look ahead, you'll see there's a chair overhanging the boats. And that's a replica of what's known as a ducking stool. It's not an original. We know there is an original ducking stool just a few miles downstream of here, Fordwich, but that's a modern one. But ducking was used as a punishment in 17th century England. And somebody being ducked would be tied into a chair like that one. They'd be lowered into the water, they'd be lifted back out again, soaking wet, covered in waterweed, and remember what else had been floating down the river. And then they'd be left tied there for some hours while people laughed at them. And the idea was that it would shame people into changing their behaviour. So you'd inflict it, for example, on merchants who cheated their customers, on people who got drunk in public, and most famously on women who shouted at their husbands too much. The idea being to teach the woman why sometimes it would be better if she merely kept her mouth firmly closed. However, it could also be inflicted on a husband, and if he neglected his wife, was what was termed an inadequate husband, he too could be sentenced to be ducked. So it was an equal opportunity punishment. They have suggested it should be brought back for certain politicians or bankers or journalists. Just imagine what you could get for the television rights. Pro-celebrity ducking. Just going to wait here a moment while this boat comes downstream. Thank you very much. Now, the black and white building here is known as the Old Weaver's House. And it gets its name from being old, it dates back to the year 1500. And it's the home to a group of refugee weavers. And the weavers who lived here were woodland weavers. They were French-speaking Belgians who had fled to country so they could escape from the fighting during the wars of religion and community. And we got lots of them here. We got in fact so many that at one point 30% of the population of the country were French-speaking refugees. And are known locally as the strangers, from the French word l'étranger, meaning a foreigner. They were allowed to worship in the crypt in the basement of the cathedral, and we still have a French Protestant chapel there, which will hold a service every Sunday in French. So back under the High Street. When the hospital above us stopped being a place where a pilgrim might find shelter, it was then refounded as a charity for the elderly. And 10 old people of Canterbury were chosen to come and live within these buildings. And they have become known as the 10 Inn Brothers, or the Inn Sisters of the hospital. And it still uses that today. There's still 10 elderly people come and live here. The hospital also had a school in it where 20 young boys from the city would be taught how to read and to write. They didn't worry too much about educating girls back then. And they also had to look after any of the Queen's wounded soldiers coming back from her wars on the continent. And the last time that we know that that happened was in 1815 after the Battle of Waterloo. The flowers here on the ledge belong to the people who live on the other side of the river. And they use that little white boat we're just passing to come over and water them. 3 years ago, as well as the flowers, they also put out a number of pots of strawberries. And they said to us, well, if you're passing and any of the strawberries are ripe, you can just help yourselves to them, which we did. They did not get any of their own strawberries that year, and they haven't put any out since. They were nice. Okay, I need to just pull into the right here to allow the rowing boat to come down. Just watch out for the flowers and the vegetation on this side. This jungle tour is at no added expense. Thank you. So when we get past the bridge, you'll notice that the river divides into two. And the right-hand branch goes up to and underneath an old monastery known as the Greyfriars. The Greyfriars were the Franciscans, followers of St. Francis of Assisi. If you want to go and see the gardens, and we do strongly recommend it, go through a black gateway on the way back up to the High Street, marked Greyfriars Guest House. And that will take you into what are known, usually in Canterbury, as the secret gardens. There's not many people tend to find them. Can you see behind me these marks on the bridge? What do you reckon would have caused those?
Machine gun.
No, but you're close. They were bombs. Basically, Canterbury was heavily bombed during the Second World War, and one bomb actually landed here at the river, and the shrapnel did that damage.
Wow.
In 1942, the Allies had bombed two very beautiful German cities called Rostock and Lübeck, and in vengeance, the Germans said that they would try and destroy some of the English cathedral cities. And they attacked Exeter, Bath, York, Norwich and Canterbury. And we lost, I would say, about a quarter of the middle of the city of Canterbury to the bombing. But we were very fortunate in that high explosive bombs fell all the way around the cathedral, but none landed on the cathedral itself. The only bombs which did land on it were a number of fire bombs or incendiaries which had landed up on the roof. And during the raids, on the roof of the cathedral was stationed a group of extremely brave people called fire watchers. And the job of the fire watcher was to look out over the city, and where they could see a fire being started, they would guide the fire brigade to it to help put it out. I once made the mistake of describing the fire watchers as being a very brave body of men, and a lady on my boat pointed out that during the war she'd been a fire watcher, and it wasn't just men who did it, it was women as well. But in any case, the fire watchers, when the fire bombs landed on the roof near to them, simply picked them up and threw them over the side of the church so they could burn out harmlessly on the ground beneath. Which is quite brave, because there's not a large explosive charge on a fire bomb, but it's certainly enough to maim or possibly even kill you if it goes off while you're holding it. Compared to a lot of continental cities, places like Hamburg or Berlin or Antwerp, losing a quarter, as we did here in Canterbury, wasn't so great. They lost a lot more. But for England, it was quite serious. If you're interested in that period of our history, we have to our left the Canterbury Heritage Museum, and that contains a number of artefacts that show the history of the city from the Romans through to World War II and beyond. For the English people, I'd point out that it contains both Bagpuss and Rupert the Bear as well, because both of those were invented here in Canterbury. Rupert the Bear was invented by a local artist called Mary Portell, and Bagpuss by Oliver Postgate. Anybody here watched Bagpuss? Yep, well the original Bagpuss doll is in that museum. They've made a replica of Emily through it. Pom? Yep. And they're also doing the clangers again, and they've got they've got a couple of the clangers dolls in there as well. In whatever language you prefer, and if you prefer to go somewhere else, you go to one of the websites like TripAdvisor and leave a comment there. But the important thing really is that if you've enjoyed it, do please tell your friends and do come again sometime.
Yeah, of course, we'll tell. We enjoyed it, I'm enjoying it.